Mom always said I was dead to the world when I slept. I would suddenly doze off in the middle of class, while eating, even halfway across the street. My homeroom teacher suggested I get checked at a hospital, but Mom brushed it off with a scoff. She just stayed up all night on her phone. After that, my phone was confiscated, the lock on my door was removed, and every time I showed the slightest sign of drowsiness, I got slapped awake. I did not want to be hit, and I did not want Mom to get angry, so I started pinching my thighs, yanking my hair, even downing medicated oil just to stay awake. But when that wave of sleep hit, nothing could stop it. On the day of the final exam, Mom happened to be assigned as one of the proctors. I bit through my lip, silently begging myself, just this once. Just hold on. But in the end, I still couldn't fight it. The desk was suddenly flipped over. I went down with my chair, crashing hard onto the floor. My head struck the edge of the desk, and darkness swallowed everything in an instant. Mom stood beside me, furious and disappointed. Cecilia Thorne, are you really so obsessed with sleeping that you don't even care about your final exams? If you're that lazy, then lie there and keep sleeping. I lay sprawled over my exam paper, my vision dimming bit by bit. Mom, this time, I might really sleep for a long, long time. How much longer are you going to keep this up, Thorne? Mom's voice rang across the dead-silent exam hall, sharp enough to cut through the stillness. Her heels clicked against the floor as she walked, step by step, toward where I had fallen. My cheek was pressed against the cold concrete. A warm trickle slid down from where my head had struck the desk. Miss Collins, I think Cecilia might have actually fainted. A boy nearby said quietly, his voice hesitant. Fainted? Don't be ridiculous. This is just her laziness acting up. Mom grabbed the back of my collar in one swift motion. Her grip was shockingly strong as she hauled me up off the ground. My head lolled limply, and the back of my hand scraped against the rough floor, tearing the skin open in a streak of red. You sleep in class, you sleep while eating, and now you're sleeping during your final exam too? Mom hissed under her breath, her teeth clenched tight. You have no shame, but I do. I'm the dean of discipline. She dragged me toward the exit. My toes trailed uselessly across the floor, leaving behind 2 long gray streaks. Miss Collins, maybe we should take her to the infirmary? The younger proctor, Olivia Zanetti, stood up, worry written clearly across her face. The infirmary? Miss Zanetti, don't let her fool you. Mom did not even turn back. She only let out a cold laugh. She was up all night on her phone, and now she's putting on a show for me. But she looks really pale. Something's not right, Olivia said, stepping down from the podium as if to stop her. She's faking it. I know my own daughter. Mom yanked the front door of the exam hall open. Keep working on your exams. Anyone who looks around again will have their paper voided. With that, the room fell into instant silence. Mom dragged me all the way to a spare classroom at the end of the corridor. It was used to store broken desks and chairs, and the air carried a sharp, musty smell. Without the slightest restraint, she flung me onto the ground. The back of my head slammed hard against the door with a dull thud. And in that exact moment, something shifted. My body suddenly felt light. I drifted upward, hovering in midair as I looked down at myself. The girl on the ground lay motionless, her eyes shut tight, her face frighteningly pale. Her limbs were twisted at unnatural angles. Mom crouched down and grabbed my chin roughly. Cecilia Thorne, open your eyes. Seeing that I didn't respond, my mom let out a cold, irritated laugh, her gaze dropping to the blood near my ear. It had flowed from my temple, tracing down along the curve of my ear and into my neck. She frowned in disgust and pulled out a tissue from her pocket. You even prepared red ink in advance just to fake this. She scrubbed harshly at my ear. The rough paper tore at the skin, smearing the blood even further. Disgusting. Just like your useless father, always resorting to cheap tricks. Mom crumpled the blood-stained tissue into a ball and threw it straight at my face. Stay here and lie all you want. I'll see how long you can keep this act up. Then she stood, brushed the dust from her hands, and walked out of the spare classroom without another glance. My soul hovered near the ceiling, straining desperately to call out to her. Mom, that's not red ink. That's my blood. Mom, my head hurts so much. Please save me. But she could not hear me. All she left behind was her cold, unyielding back as she walked away. A rush of hurried footsteps echoed down the corridor. It was Olivia. She held a stack of scratch paper in her arms, using it as an excuse as she quickly made her way to the door of the spare classroom. Peering through the glass panel, her brows knit tightly together. Cecilia, can you hear me? Olivia knocked gently on the door. The girl on the floor did not move. The blood that had just been wiped away began to seep out again, trickling down from her earlobe and staining the collar of her uniform. Olivia's expression changed immediately as she reached for the doorknob. Ms. Zanetti, what are you doing? My mom's icy voice came from the other end of the corridor. Startled, Olivia jerked her hand back. Miss Collins, I don't think Cecilia's in good condition. She's perfectly fine. Mom strode over and shoved Olivia aside without hesitation. MS. Zanetti, don't interfere. If you want to cure this child's laziness, you have to be ruthless. Let her go hungry for a couple of meals. At that, she pulled out a heavy ring of keys from her waist and picked out a brass one. Miss Collins, it's winter. There isn't even any heating inside. Olivia tried again, her voice tight with concern. But the lock shut with a sharp, dreadful click. When she freezes enough, she'll know to get up and finish her exam. The bell signaling the end of the final exam rang out. The corridor instantly came alive, students spilling out in clusters, chattering as they compared answers. My soul drifted outside the spare classroom, watching as my mother stood at the office entrance. Avery Thorne stood beside her, obediently handing over a cup of hot coffee. Mom, you must be tired from proctoring. Have something warm, Avery said sweetly, a smile lighting up her face. Mom took the coffee, the frost on her face melting instantly. You're as sweet as ever, Avery. Did you solve the last math question? I did. I checked it twice. I should get full marks. Avery looped her arm through Mom's and gave it a light shake. Good. Not like that useless thing in there, playing dead the moment she stepped into the exam hall. Mom took a sip of coffee, her gaze flicking sharply toward the spare classroom. Avery followed her line of sight, a faint glint of satisfaction flashing in her eyes. Mom, don't be mad at Cecilia, Avery said softly, her tone full of concern. She probably just didn't rest well yesterday. She's always hiding under the covers with her phone reading novels. I've told her not to so many times. The words were light, almost casual, but they landed exactly where they would hurt the most. Mom's expression darkened instantly. I knew it. Those dark circles didn't come from nowhere. She slammed the coffee cup down onto the desk. I already had her door lock removed, and she still dares to sneak around behind my back? She's completely out of control. I stood beside them, my soul lingering, a dull ache spreading through me. I remembered the night Mom tore the lock off my bedroom door. That day, she had failed her professional evaluation at school, and when she came home, everything seemed to irritate her. She kicked my half-closed door open and found me dozing off at my desk. Without a word, she grabbed her tools and removed the entire lock right in front of me. From now on, you don't get privacy in this house. Mom threw the lock onto the floor and pointed straight at me. Let's see if you still dare to hide behind closed doors and slack off. I had not cried that night. I had only stared blankly at the inside of my thighs. They were covered in tiny puncture marks from a compass, dense, overlapping wounds. Some had already scabbed over, while others still oozed a faint yellow fluid. To cover the lingering metallic scent of blood, I had to douse my legs in medicated oil every day. But when Mom smelled it, she decided it was something else entirely. So young, and already picking up bad habits. Using cheap vape smoke to cover the smell, is that it? At the time, she had slapped me hard across the face and confiscated my phone. From that moment on, I did not even have the right to set an alarm to wake myself up. I could only stab deeper, deeper each time. And even after I died, I still did not blame her. I knew it had not been easy for her to raise 2 children on her own. I knew the pressure from her job was overwhelming. I only felt regret. Regret that I would never get the chance to prove to her that I had not been slacking off. At noon, the school dismissal broadcast echoed across campus. Students gradually filed out of the building, and the corridors returned to a suffocating silence. There was no heating in the spare classroom. The girl on the floor had gone completely stiff. The sun had climbed to its highest point in the sky, yet not a single ray could reach through the window, half sealed with metal plating. My soul silently kept track of the time. 3 hours had passed since I fell. The golden window for saving someone with a brain hemorrhage had likely long slipped away. Just then, a beam of harsh light appeared at the end of the corridor. The school's security guard was making his rounds, checking doors and windows one by one. The flashlight swept past the spare classroom window, then stopped. On the floor was my hand, pale and cold. My fingers were locked in a death grip from the final spasms before I died, clutching a torn piece of my exam admission slip. The guard paused, then leaned closer to peer through the glass. Hello? Is there a student inside? He knocked on the window and reached for the walkie-talkie at his waist. Academic office? There seems to be a student lying in the spare classroom on the 3rd floor. She isn't moving. My soul lunged toward the window, staring desperately at the device in his hand. Please save me. Please open the door. Static crackled through the walkie-talkie. Then Mom's voice came through, cold and authoritative, leaving no room for defiance. I locked that classroom myself. It's disciplinary confinement. Leave it. The guard hesitated. But Miss Collins, the kid's posture looks strange. Should I go in and check? I said leave it. No one is to open that door today. Mom's voice rose sharply, absolute and commanding. Let her reflect in there. She isn't going to starve. The guard let out a quiet sigh and switched off his flashlight. All right then. You're the authority. You have the final say. Across the street from the school, a small restaurant buzzed with warmth and steam. It was the day the final exams ended, and Mom had booked a private room to celebrate. The table was filled with Avery's favorite dishes: barbecue ribs, garlic butter shrimp, and baked salmon. The only thing missing was my favorite, grilled cheese and tomato soup. Here, Avery. Eat more shrimp. It's good for your brain. Mom picked up a shrimp, carefully peeled it, and placed it into Avery's plate. Thanks, Mom. Avery smiled sweetly, then placed a piece of ribs into Mom's plate. You should eat too. You worked hard proctoring today. As long as you get first place in your grade, it's all worth it. Mom looked at Avery with nothing but warmth in her eyes. Once your results are out, if you rank first, I'll grant you one wish. Go ahead. What do you want? Avery tilted her head, thinking for a moment. I want to go to Disneyland. All my classmates have been. All right, it's a deal. I'll take you next week. Mom agreed without hesitation, her smile widening as even the lines on her face softened. My soul stood in the corner of the private room, watching the two of them laugh and talk. And suddenly, I felt cold. I remembered the half-finished note still tucked inside my uniform pocket that I had stayed up late writing the night before. If I can place in the top 50 on this final exam, I hope you will reinstall the door lock. That piece of paper was now soaked through with my blood, the ink long smeared beyond recognition. I would never live to see the day she kept that promise. After lunch, Mom returned to school to grade papers. The afternoon was reserved for teachers to mark exams together, with time compressed and every schedule tightly arranged. The grading room was filled with nothing but the faint scratching of red pens across paper. Mom was assigned to grade language papers. She worked quickly, until she flipped to a completely blank answer sheet. My name, Cecilia Thorne, was unevenly scrawled across the name field. It was what I had forced myself to write at the very start of the exam, clinging to the last thread of consciousness I had left. Right after that, I collapsed to the floor. Mom stared at the blank answer sheet, the muscles at the corner of her eye twitching violently. Not only are you lazy, but you've even learned to hand in a blank paper just to provoke me. She gritted her teeth, gripping the red pen so tightly it looked like it might snap. Miss Collins, what's wrong? Why are you so angry? The head of the language department leaned over to take a look. Well, would you look at that? Whose paper is this? Not even a single word in the essay. That's practically a direct challenge to the teacher. My useless daughter, of course. Who else? Mom let out a cold laugh and picked up the red pen, slashing a massive X across the paper. The mark took up nearly the entire sheet, pressed so hard it bled through to the back. She's getting more outrageous by the day. Sleeping through class was bad enough. Now she's pulling this during finals. Mom abruptly stood up, her chair screeching harshly against the floor. I'm going to deal with her properly today. She grabbed the zero-score paper covered in red ink and strode out of the grading room. The wind in the hallway lifted the hem of her coat, carrying a trace of her simmering anger. At 4 in the afternoon, the sun had already begun to sink. The corridor outside the spare classroom was dim, washed in fading light. My mom's heels struck the tiles in crisp, echoing clicks. When she reached the door, she did not even bother with the key. She kicked it hard instead. Cecilia Thorne, the sun's about to set. Haven't you slept enough yet? The door didn't open. Inside, there was only silence. Mom let out a cold snort, pulled out her keys, and jammed one into the lock, twisting it sharply. The door swung open with force. A gust of cold air, thick with the smell of mildew, rushed out. Holding the zero-score paper, Mom strode into the room. Cecilia Thorne, get up and take a look at the excellent score you earned. Her voice cut off abruptly. I lay on the floor in the exact same position as 4 hours earlier, completely unmoving. Still pretending to be dead? The slanted sunlight cut into the room, illuminating dust drifting through the beam. My body remained curled in an unnatural position. My fingers, locked in the spasms before death, were still clutching the torn admission slip. My nails had turned a dark bluish purple, embedded deeply into my flesh. The blood that had flowed from my temple had long dried, forming a dark red stain on the concrete. Mom walked over and nudged my stiff foot with the tip of her heel, her expression full of disgust. What kind of act are you putting on now? She rolled the zero-score paper into a tube and struck my shoulder with it. You think a bit of fake blood is going to get you out of copying this paper 100 times? There was no response. I didn't move at all, letting her kick and hit me. Cecilia Thorne, my patience has limits. Mom's voice rose, anger tightly restrained beneath it. Get up right now and go to the office to redo this paper. She reached down to grab my arm, but the moment her fingers made contact, she froze. My skin was cold, completely devoid of the warmth of a living body. My limbs were rigid. Why are you so cold? She recoiled as if shocked, a flicker of panic flashing through her eyes. But just as quickly, it was smothered by her ingrained certainty. You're lying on the floor dressed like that. Of course you're cold. She let out a cold laugh and straightened. That kind of trick won't work on me. Even if you freeze to death here today, you're still finishing that paper. At that moment, Olivia passed by the corridor. She was holding a few sheets of unused scratch paper. When she leaned in and glanced into the spare classroom, She froze. Just one look, and the papers slipped from her hands, scattering across the floor. Doze. The papers fell with a dry, rustling rattle, scattering across the gray linoleum floor like giant, white autumn leaves. Olivia Zanetti did not scream immediately. She stood on the threshold of the spare classroom, her hands suspended in the air, her face completely drained of color. Miss Collins. Olivia's voice was a thin, cracked whisper, completely stripped of her usual academic poise. Her hand. Look at her hand. What's there to look at? Eleanor Collins snapped, her hand still holding the rolled up exam paper like a club. She didn't look down at me. Her eyes were fixed on Olivia's wide, terrified face. I told you, she's just putting on a show to get out of her detention. She's been doing this since middle school. She's blue, Miss Collins. Olivia shrieked, her voice losing all its restraint, cracking with a raw, desperate terror that made the corridor outside go dead silent. The nails, her fingernails are purple. And the skin, my God, the skin is like marble. She scrambled forward, dropping to her knees in the wet, cold dust of the floor. She didn't look at Eleanor's warning glare. Her fingers reached out, trembling violently as they pressed against my neck, the spot just beneath my earlobe where the dried crimson stream had formed a dark, sticky crust. There was no pulse. The carotid artery was still and silent, as cold as the concrete under my cheek. No, Olivia gasped, her hand dropping from my neck, her body shaking so hard. Her knees knocked against the floorboards. No, she's dead. Ms. Collins, she's dead. Her body is completely rigid. Get up, Olivia. Eleanor roared, her face turning an angry, splotchy purple beneath her neat collar. Who gave you permission to play the doctor in my school? I locked this room myself. I am her mother. I know her limits. She walked over, her heavy heels clicking sharply on the floorboards, and grabbed my arm to pull me up. But the moment her fingers wrapped around my wrist, her voice died in her throat. The arm didn't bend. It didn't slide. It stayed locked in that tight, unnatural, defensive curl I had held during my final seconds of agony, her massive strength only lifting my entire, rigid upper body off the concrete like a frozen block of wood. The rolled-up zero-score paper slipped from her hand, falling onto the floorboards with a soft, final clack. Cecilia. Eleanor whispered, her head shaking slowly, her wide eyes locked onto my paper-white face. Cecilia, get up. I'm the dean of discipline. You can't do this to me. The principal is waiting for the report. I hovered near the ceiling, my soul looking down at her. She was still calling it an act. She was still worried about the report. The general office of the third floor was crowded with police officers there, leather duty belts creaking in the silence, and 2 forensic investigators from the county medical examiner's office carrying heavy black bags. The wail of the ambulance outside had stopped, the red and blue lights still casting long, rhythmic shadows across the frosted glass windows of the corridor. Principal Harris sat behind his desk, his face the color of old lard, his hand shaking as he took a sip of cold water. The timeline, Dr. Miller, Harris said, his voice hoarse as he looked at the senior medical examiner. We need the exact timeline. When did she pass? Dr. Miller, an older man with sharp gray eyes and a tailored coat, stood near the whiteboard where my zero-score exam was pinned. The rigor mortis is fully established in the upper extremities, Mr. Harris. Dr. Miller said, his voice flat but carrying the unyielding force of a hammer blow. The core temperature of the liver is 82 degrees. Based on the rate of cooling in a 40-degree room, the death occurred at approximately 10:15 a.m. within 15 minutes of her initial collapse in the exam hall. Eleanor Collins sat on the leather sofa, her coat still draped over her shoulders, her fingers clutching a dry tissue. She was faking it, she muttered, her voice dry, rattling in her throat. She had been staying up all night on her phone. Her sister saw her. Avery told me. There was no phone, Miss Collins, Detective Miller said, stepping out of the inner office. He laid a heavy, clear plastic bag on the desk. We searched Cecilia's room. Her phone was confiscated 3 months ago and was locked in your office safe. The only electronic device we found in her possession was an old non-functional MP3 player with no battery. He looked at Eleanor, his eyes cold as winter. And her legs, Miss Collins. The forensic team has completed the initial examination of her thighs. He opened his notebook, his pen scratching across the paper. We found 92 separate puncture wounds on her inner thighs, caused by a steel drafting compass. The oldest scabs are 3 weeks old. The newest were made during the first 10 minutes of the exam yesterday morning. She had been physically mutilating her own flesh to stay awake, because she was terrified of your slaps. Eleanor stared at the plastic bag on the desk. The classroom's old, blackwood desk. The red pen. The X she had slashed across my name. She was lazy, Eleanor whispered, her fingers twisting the torn tissue. I raised her by myself. I had to be strict. The medical records from her middle school were sent to your office last winter, Miss Collins, Detective Miller said, his voice dropping into a register that made the entire room go silent. The diagnosis was narcolepsy with cataplexy, a chronic neurological disorder that causes sudden, uncontrollable sleep attacks during times of high emotional stress or physical fatigue. The files were marked as reviewed and filed by your digital signature. No. Eleanor's hand slowly dropped to her side. I thought. It was just a label she used to get out of her work. The news of the Kingsport Academy tragedy did not start with a press release. It started with a simple, anonymous thread on a local whistleblower forum, shared under a heading that read, "The Dean's Iron Fist, the Death of Cecilia Thorne." The post didn't contain my name. It didn't contain my face. It contained 48 pages of medical logs, the screenshots of my mother's signed reviewed files on my narcolepsy, and the walkie-talkie audio recording from the security guard who had tried to open the spare classroom door at noon. I said, "Leave it. No one is to open that door today. Let her reflect in there. She isn't going to starve." The wail of the wailing whined through the corridor seemed to echo in the recording, followed by the heavy clack of her keys as she walked away. By noon on Tuesday, the post had gone viral. Avery's Instagram page, which had been a gold-plated archive of ideal student photos, luxury study sessions, and self-help quotes about purity, was flooded with hundreds of thousands of comments. "You systematic liar. You knew your sister was dying and you told your mother. She was on her phone? The favorite daughter is a parasite." Her university admission was suspended by the board within 48 hours. The principal of Kingsport Academy was removed from his office, and the local school district took over the administration of the campus. I sat in my green armchair. Or rather, my soul sat in the empty corner of my bedroom, watching the dust dance in the afternoon sun. The room was vast, quiet, and completely empty of my things. "The case has been handed to the state prosecutor, Sarah, my father's attorney," a sharp-faced man named Marcus said to my father as they stood in the living room. "They're filing charges of manslaughter by neglect, child abuse, and the intentional alteration of student records. Eleanor will be going away for 15 years. My father didn't speak. He was a simple, quiet man who had lived in a small rental flat near the old harbor since the divorce. He had never had the money to fight Eleanor for our custody, but today he stood in her living room, his hands shaking as he held my old hand-drawn calendar from middle school. "My little Cecilia," he whispered, his tears running down his worn face, dark spots appearing on the wood of the table. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I should have taken you. I should have fought her." I walked over to his side, my soul gently leaning against his shoulder. "Don't worry, Dad," I whispered. "I'm not cold anymore." The court trial of Eleanor Collins was held in late February. The courtroom was crowded with reporters, school board members, and curious legal onlookers. It was the biggest case of the year, a classic high-profile tragedy of a family destroyed by pride and an iron fist. Eleanor sat at the defense table, her hair unwashed and wild, her gray skin looking like stone under the bright lights of the room. She was wearing a simple gray prison uniform, her hands cuffed, her eyes vacant as she stared at the floor. Beside her, Avery sat in the visitor gallery, her face pale, her beautiful silk blouse wrinkled and stained, her fingers clutching her pearl necklace as she wept silently. "The evidence is indisputable, Your Honor," the prosecutor said, displaying the digital logs from Eleanor's office safe and the toxicology report from the clinic. The defendant faked her concern to enter the classroom, kicked her dying daughter, and then locked her in a 40-degree room to freeze to death while she went to celebrate her other daughter's performance. He looked at Eleanor, his eyes cold as steel. "We are asking for the maximum sentence, 20 years without the possibility of parole." The judge didn't hesitate. He raised his wooden gavel and slammed it down with a sharp final clack. "Motion approved. The defendant is sentenced to 20 years in the state penitentiary." As the bailiffs led her out through the side door, her hands clutched against her chest, she didn't look at Avery. She didn't look at the corporate lawyers. She looked at the empty seat at the plaintiff's table, the seat where I should have been sitting, dressed in my best uniform, watching her finally pay the price of her choices. But there was no one there. Only the cold draft of the air conditioner, blowing a few dry leaves across the polished wood of the table. The coastal town of Mendocino was quiet in the winter. The air smelled of salt, pine needles, and the cold mist that rolled off the Pacific every morning. The only sound was the distant, rhythmic crash of the waves against the black cliffs of the harbor. I sat on the wooden deck of my father's small, gray-shingled cottage, a cup of hot chamomile tea in my hand, or rather, my father sat there, a warm wool blanket wrapped around his knees, my mother-in-law's old photo album in his lap. He looked at my childhood photo, the one where I was still 6 years old, wearing my first school bag, smiling under the bright lights of the playground. Cecilia, he whispered, his voice quiet, almost lost beneath the sound of the surf. The sun is very warm today. You'd like the sea? I knelt beside him, my cheek resting against his arm, my soul completely light, completely quiet, and my path finally, beautifully at rest. The wind off the water was cold, but it felt clean against my skin, carrying the last dry leaves of the past away into the endlessly beautiful horizon ahead. I closed my eyes, let the soft, cold wind wash over my face, and stepped into the warm, endless dawn of my new life.